morning, world. This is Steve Rao, the host of Pod TV's World Edition, soon to be a part of the Roku TV network. And on Pod TV, we talk about innovation, global affairs, and what this pandemic is doing to the world politically, economically, culturally. Today, I greet you live from PBS Carolina Studios, where we had an elaborate discussion with Dr. Wilmer Leon from SiriusXM and other panelists, Howard Eustace, on Black Issues Forum, on the Russia-Ukraine crisis, historic colleges and Black universities, and the recent gun violence and bomb threats, actually, at these universities, and inflation. I'm going to take a moment to talk a little bit about each three before we begin our discussions today, as this Friday from PBS, we like to talk about those issues on World Edition. First, as it relates to Russia, the basic premise is why Putin wants to invade the Ukraine. And I've said it before on this show. It's for two reasons. He wants to weaken the Ukraine, and he wants to minimize their ties to NATO and the West. It's also about energy. He controls a lot of oil and gas to Europe, and it's really about the Nord Stream pipeline also, which in many ways I think is why he's not invading as much as he says he's going to invade, although troop escalations have now increased over this week. They were going to de-escalate the troops. Now, I think the president of Russia realizes that economically the country would be devastated if sanctions are imposed. It could completely destroy their gas and oil exports, and it could drive Europe into a global recession, driving prices up. But at the end of the day, I think what it's also about is just authoritarianism government. The fact that any nation would feel that they could just invade a weaker nation because they want to. We had healthy debate on this issue. Dr. Leon said that it really wasn't our business. It was like the Iraq War, and that there's no proof that Putin wanted to invade. But I think it's wrong for a sovereign nation to invade a weaker, smaller nation. I think independence and freedom is what we should stand for. Where would the world be if we told Adolf Hitler that he could invade Czechoslovakia, the Sudetenland, and most of Europe? The world would be a very different place today. The second topic is inflation. And we have Sasha Starr and others that may be joining us. But the bottom line is, I think inflation is about 7.5%. It's worse than it's been in a long time. It's not at 12%, which it was at the beginning of the decade. But in order to fight inflation, we've got to actually increase the interest rate, which is always a challenge of doing that while balancing economic growth. One issue we talked about is inflation hurting those minority communities, disenfranchised communities, poor households? And I believe it is. And I think that elite economists can say, well, unemployment is low, inflation is bad, but it's not that bad, we're going to get through it. Well, at the end of the day, the difference is inflation affects everybody, unlike unemployment, which is a small percentage of the population. And when you're unemployed, you make less than what you made before, and you may be getting unemployment. But when inflation hits everywhere, and when you're poor, you can't buy groceries, you can't buy gas, you can't buy goods. So only time will tell how severe this crisis is for the American people, but hopefully we can get through it. And the final point we'll talk about today is the recent bomb attacks on Fayetteville State University, Winston-Salem State University here in North Carolina, a number of HBCUs around the country, and whether these are racist attacks during Black History Month. Is there a connection? And what can we do as a nation to get through these racial issues that we're having? My final take is that I believe in order to address this issue, we have to face it head on. That we may not have a problem of racism, but racial bias. And that we have to celebrate Black excellence and Black brilliance and Black contributions to our country. But we cannot act like this is not a disease. It is. And we need to treat it as a disease, make sure that we have a problem, develop policies that address systemic bias, but don't ignore it, that it's going to go away if we hold hands and try to get along. These are the issues I think we will discuss today. So with us, welcome to World Edition, and I'll be here till 11 o'clock today. I want to welcome Mark Lee to the show, my co-host. We'll be talking about Olympics as well, the final day of Beijing Olympics. I'm going to close out with that. And welcome to World Edition.
Yeah, but we've also got, I think Shaquille may be joining us, but we definitely have Sasha Starr. Well, of course, they've been going through a lot as well. As a matter of fact, I had the privilege yesterday. How are you doing, Sasha? A great chess player, a great investment person as well. And of course, I'm sure he'll have some things going on in the chess space on tomorrow and all of that. But what I was going to say is I actually had the privilege of helping a friend of mine. We're going to be doing an event in the first week in March with leukemia survivors and things of that nature. It's a 24-hour streaming marathon. But two of the participants were from Canada. One was from Ontario and the other was from Ottawa. So part of their discussion was the truck drivers and the strike that they have been going through because they were having direct impact on their own lives. As a matter of fact, both consider themselves to be essential in terms of the truckers and what was going on in that space. So they did give me a little bit more perspective as to the whole struggles that are going on. So it was very interesting to hear their thoughts on that. So, like I said, I'm hoping to bring in Rob Stratham and Dorothy Dale, I believe is her name, that are the two that I met that are from Canada, so they can share it with us here on this network. But I didn't know if Sasha had any thoughts about Steve's comments or about what I just mentioned about what is going on there in Canada.
Yes, I do.
Share with us.
What are they, Sasha?
Okay, you know what? Without further ado, I will try to avoid improvisation, but rather I would like to read very quickly that Liberal government released a package of documents late Wednesday night that outlined for the Commons debate its reasons for declaring a public order emergency. The situation across the country remains concerning, volatile, and unpredictable. For the first time, the Liberal government said threats were also made to block railway lines, which would result in significant disruptions to trade corridors that carry $310 billion in goods each year. While border blockades had been cleared and traffic has resumed at Coats, Alberta and Emerson, Manitoba, the Liberal government signaled the overall threat has not ended. The protests have become a rallying point for anti-government and anti-authority, anti-vaccination, conspiracy theory, and white supremacist groups throughout Canada and other Western countries. The protesters have varying ideological grievances, which demands ranging from an end to all public health restrictions to the overthrow of the elected government, the document said. I'm done.
Wow. Interesting you say that and everything, because one of the gentlemen that I was talking to, one of the observations that they made was, and I don't know, because I know you're not a big fan, Sasha, of Mr. Trump. I also would say that you're not a big fan of Mr. Trudeau. And they actually made the parallel between the two of them. They thought that Trudeau was kind of like the Trump of the left. So I had never heard that parallel before. But would you agree with that they are very similar styles and everything, but one may be more from what people may consider conservative, and the other may be more from what people might consider.
Also, there's a big difference between two of them, that one is just stupid, but not a criminal. That's the main difference.
That would be a major difference in everything. By the way, Nick, this may surprise you. As I told you, I would let folks know results as they're coming in, and this may surprise Steve as well. But the early results are coming in on our poll for the whole world's worst president and all of that. And right now, leading by a significant margin is our current president. So our current president is not doing that well. I want to say it might be as much as like 24%.
This is going to be an upset, a major upset.
This could be a major upset about to transpire unless things change over the next several days. But yes, right now, it is not looking good for the Biden team. I don't
So
know
Trump is being dethroned by who again? Who's going to lose? Who's going to beat Trump again?
It looks like Biden, our current president.
Okay, and what is going to be his ignominious victory going to be described as?
Yes, who does?
What sort of trophy are we going to give him?
I don't know.
What's his new title? What's his new title?
Yeah, yes, I mean, what are we going to call him now?
Well, according to what I understand the show, it's the worst president ever.
And that's what it is. So
Ooh, man, that's not something you really want to win. Well, anyway, yeah, we're going to be discussing that on President's Day. I mean, obviously, I'm backstage because I'm all this stuff is going through the international media right now. So I got to push it all through.
And next
So I'll go
week
back.
we'll be doing my President's Day monologue, and we'll be talking about the presidents on Monday, and then on Tuesday I'll be doing my monologue based on a blog I just wrote on WL Tech Wire on dreamers and a U.S. situation here in North Carolina, actually, of a dreamer that's trying to fight Alzheimer's and she can't stay in America. Real quickly, before we go to the next issue, we have a lot to cover today. Let's just touch on Russia and Ukraine real quickly. We talked about it today on PBS Carolina. One thing that I'll say, I want to start with your opinions on this one issue that a political scientist, Dr. Leon, brought up on SiriusXM's Urban View channel. He runs a show called Inside the Issues. He was debating me on the news today that, well, what business does the United States telling a sovereign nation of what to do with their military forces when there's been no proof that he's going to invade? He tried to liken it to the situation in Iraq when there was weapons of mass destruction. I'll start with you, Chris Greco. What is your take on that? As someone as a military background, do you believe that the United States does have an obligation to counter any measure of a sovereign nation invading a weaker country, similar to what Kuwait did with Iraq in the first Gulf War?
Okay, so first of all, the first Gulf War was not Iraq; it was about Kuwait.
I mean,
so that
Kuwait, yeah.
the second Gulf War was about Iraq, but the first Gulf War is an exact duplicate of what has happened as a result of that. In 2014, when Putin went into Crimea, we should have at that point made our ultimatum. You will get out of Crimea. If you do not get out of Crimea, we are going to throw you out of Crimea. That's the way it's going to go. And we didn't do that because the deal was, well, the Crimeans really want them in there and they're Russian speaking and the Ukrainians don't treat them well. And this is the situation, blah, blah, blah. So that basically is what happened in that situation. In this situation, what's happening, and I wrote a big, long, I've done a ton of research on this stuff within the last day or so. Basically, what's happening is that I'm totally wrong. I'm thinking. Now, I'm not thinking like Putin. I'm thinking like Chris Greco. I'm thinking like, okay, this is what he's going to do. He's going to go in Kiev. He's going to take Ukraine. This is what's going to happen. And I'll bet you Sasha will back me up on this. I think what he's going to do is he's not going to invade to take Kiev. He's going to invade to take this little piece of land right as part of Ukraine. And he's going to sit there and say, look, the Russians, look at this. They're blowing up kindergartens. There's all kind of problems. Ukrainians can't take care of it. We're going to go in. We're going to take care of it. And they're going to take this little plot of land. And then they're going to set up everything they want in that plot of land. And then within a year or two, then they're going to say, oh, we're going to take this other little plot of land. And then we're going to just keep taking until finally they have all of Ukraine. So the bottom line on this thing is that I take it back. I don't think he's going to go in and just like, okay, we're going to just crush Kiev. I think he's going to take his tanks and whatever, and he's going to make another line. And that line is going to be just to the west of and I can't remember the name of the village I looked up, but I thought, oh, this is perfect. And that's what I think. That's what I think is going to happen at this point. He may send a couple fighters into Kiev just to say, hey, you better throttle back, or else we are going to come in and we're going to destroy your city. But I think that's what's going to happen at this point in time. And I do not think it's going to happen today. I don't think it's going to. I think maybe Monday night, because it's like it's a weekend, a long weekend for the government. Pick a long weekend, Easter, something like that. He's going to pick an area, and also it's going to be less mud. You got to remember. And I looked at the weather forecast over in Ukraine. As long as it's sub-freezing temperatures, it's going to be good for his invasion. The minute it gets above freezing, he's going to be bogged down in the mud, and that's not going to be cool.
Right, absolutely. And I think let's go real quickly. Let's go to Sasha, then Shaquille, David, and Mark, and then we're going to go to the next issue of the day. Real quickly, Sasha, what is your take on, do you believe the United States has a right to tell Russia don't invade, or do you believe we're meddling in business that's not our affairs?
It's quite murky what rights United States has. It has as many rights as it wants to assign to itself. If he wants to have right, it will have the right. If it doesn't want to have right, it will not have the right. It's all in the minds and the hands of United States. They definitely have capabilities to enforce any rights, whatever they think they have authority. The problem is a will to enforce these rights. Something else I would like to add to Chris is that it's not necessarily Putin who is going to invade Ukraine or just parts of it, even regardless how small. There are now about few hundred real thugs, so-called Wagner's group, operating already there. Now, they're unofficially, they are obviously Russian forces, and not just any forces. They are extremely well trained. They are trained in street combat. They are real bandits, well armed, well trained, and they're much more dangerous than regular Russian forces.
Yeah.
Way much more. I think one of the Wagner group is equal to 5 regular Russian soldiers. That's really proportional there. Now, so these people, they are already, there are some signs of certain operations headed by these people. And it's a similar scenario to, remember, the green soldiers who took over Crimea before it was annexed. Now, but these people, this is the green soldiers. They were basically regular soldiers brought in from Asia, parts of Russia, some Buryat forces, Kalmyk forces, this type of non-Russian forces. So that could make sure that they will not be friendly to Crimean population. They will do exactly what they are told to do and so on. But they're still soldiers. Now, the Wagner group, they're not soldiers. They're well-armed and trained thugs. And that's a danger. See, the danger. Another one is that Putin always can say, "Well, they're not our armed forces. They're like the special group of people who feel certain way and would like to express themselves in a certain way. But we're not in charge of them. They're doing whatever they want." And this is where the danger is.
Absolutely. I mean, I think this is it's incredible. So, Keel Latimer, real quickly, your thought on it before we go to David, and then
I don't really have much else to add. I think Sasha sums it up pretty well, and Lieutenant Colonel Greco, I think, sums up the situation there pretty well. So, yeah, I might leave it.
Our next topic will be inflation, and I would be curious as to getting your business perspective. But David, do you have anything to add before we go to the next issue?
Yeah, well, I kind of echo what Sasha said, about the rights of America. America have got whatever rights that they decide that they want to have, and but then there's a curious correlation with what rights that they assign to themselves, and what's out in it for America. I think that has a lot to do with it. When they went into Kuwait, there was a good reason that it was a small country overthrown. When they went to Iraq, that was a very spurious sort of reasons, but there was a lot of the back stuff involved with that. So I think that the rights of America to do what they like to cover is very much correlated with what's in it for America.
Absolutely. I mean, and thank you so much. Well, the next issue, we're going to talk about current events, and obviously, Mark, again, a Black history leader we could talk about. But the next issue is inflation. And so is it, I'm going to start with Shaquille. Shaquille, you as a business leader, do you believe the right thing to do? And I got asked this question today, and I was a bit out of my league there. But, the classic way of dealing with inflation is you raise interest rates, and you have to balance that with, not constraining or contracting economic growth. So what do you think we need to do here? Obviously we've got to do something. Do you believe that we need to increase the rate, and it should be up to the Fed to make that decision? Obviously, right?
Yeah, it should be up to the Fed in the current system. We can have a debate about whether or not we even should have a Fed, but under the current system, yes, that should be up to the Fed. That's one thing you can do is raise interest rates. Another thing you can do is stop wasting the taxpayers' money and indebting future generations by blowing money on things that don't actually add to your asset base. So inflation, when you are spending money just on non-asset things, it doesn't that doesn't help. It makes it worse. If you are spending money on things that actually improve the value of the country itself, roads, bridges, airports, whatever, well, then you can make the argument that that expenditure doesn't necessarily lead to higher rates of inflation. There is going to be some level of inflation just simply due to the fact that the economy was so depressed during the coronavirus. And of course, supply chain issues are not all Biden's fault. Some of that is just because, there's a bit of a choking that has occurred as a result of the slowdown after the coronavirus, and still the coronavirus is still obviously affecting supply lines. But inflation needs to be tempered by a raise in interest rates. Also, the fact that so much money has been pumped into the economy, you're going to need to see a high level of economic growth. And I think I've said this on a previous show. One of the greatest concerns I have for the United States and for the West in general is that a lot of this money has gone into assets in the hope that those assets will increase in value. But what we haven't seen is an increase in investment into productive assets. A lot of investment has just gone into, buying property or buying, whatever, without buying machinery, without buying all those sorts of things that can lead to that increase in production. And that's a really significant problem. I think that's been a problem for decades, but it's becoming a lot more pronounced. And really, I think it weakens us from a perspective of national security as well, because we can't manufacture things anymore. And that's a real problem.
Okay, that's an interesting point. Thank you so much. Sasha, we'll go to you on inflation, just your thoughts of dealing with it. And, other countries in the world have had inflation at 1,000%. But, you agree. You did an excellent job on the answer today. What are your thoughts, Sasha?
My thought that it's still debatable whether it's transitional inflation, which will be gone in next few months, or it's quite a permanent thing that will stay with us for quite a few years. The interest rates will be raised most likely next month, and there could be more than one raise. It could be up to 4, maybe even 7 raises. So, well, the truth, there is very little you can do against these races. I mean, how you can defend yourself to buy Kalashnikov and shoot it. Like,
there you go. That'll do it.
What's your way of doing that? So essentially, the only thing what you can do as an investor, become way much more defensive, going into high yield dividend stocks, which we are discussing on our investment shows. And actually, even with all this market malaise, almost all of them, I did quite well in the last several weeks when the market was going down even 20% in some cases. Or in some cases like PayPal, it went down well over 50%. The high-yielding dividend stocks performed quite well. And I think it will remain the case, because when people realize that they cannot get any sizable gains in bonds or in stocks anywhere else, they will gravitate sooner or later to high-yielding dividend stocks, which will make them even more attractive, which will drive their prices even higher, and the profits will do one of two things. Either they will start buying back their own stock, or they will increase dividends, which will make them even more attractive. So that's really, if you think about it, it's a no-brainer case.
Okay, fantastic. Any other insight, Chris, Mark, David, before we talk about other things today?
Well, just one. I just want to state So one of the indicators of economic growth is gross domestic product, right? GDP. And Shaquille, tell me if I'm off on this. But GDP, when it says domestic product, it doesn't necessarily mean that product, that domestic, is here. In other words, if there's a U.S. person or company overseas, they still count that as gross domestic product, even though it's produced overseas by a U.S. company that is overseas at that point in time. So when you do that type of thing, it brings in the entire world. It brings in the idea that, hey, if we have production over in Europe, or we have production in the Far East, or in West Asia, or in East Asia, we have, that gross domestic product is going to be affected by the situations happening overseas. And Russia right now, just to let you know, comparative, is 22% inflation. So we think we're hurting, with this inflation aspect. They're at 22%. Hence, they're sitting on Ukraine, right, which is a highly productive area to be able to do things that they need to do.
Yeah, but come on.
I agree with what you say, but if I can just say in relation to rates of inflation in places like Russia. So Russia is experiencing a couple of things, but one of the things, obviously, if you look at the ruble, which I decided for fun to have a trade the other day on the Russian rubles, and I've made 45,000 rubles, which is $700. But
you're rich, 45,000 rubles.
Rich now. I think I've got 100,000 rubles in my account.
Okay.
But if you actually have a look at it, the Russian ruble is worth 20%, 25% less than what it was worth, 6 months ago against the US dollar. So having some level of inflation there, you're going to experience. But also, inflation in of itself isn't necessarily bad. Now, this isn't really the case in Russia, but if you are a developing country and your country starts to actually develop, then of course you're going to see inflation. Oftentimes you see quite high rates of inflation, but that could actually be quite a positive thing depending on the circumstance. But in an advanced economy like the United States, you don't want to see elevated rates of inflation for too long, especially when it's not like you're going through some of the stuff that happened after World War II. It's not like you're seeing some of the stuff that happened with, in the 70s and 80s and things like that. You're seeing the government say, we've spent trillions of dollars and it hasn't worked. So we've got a really great idea. Bear with me now. Let's spend some more trillions. I mean, it's insanity, and everybody is saying it's going to lead to more inflation. It led to more inflation, and everyone's saying if you do it more, you're going to have more inflation. And you have a president that says, if we spend more, we're going to have less inflation. Well, I can't think of any country anywhere in the world where that idea has worked. So it is a problem, and I think it's a problem which is different to the problem that is happening in Russia. If Putin was to decide, I'll rephrase that. If the situation between Russia and the Ukraine resolves itself, then over a fairly quick period of time, you would expect to see a little bit more strength in the Russian economy. You would expect to see the Russian ruble rebound, and things like that. That's going to drive inflation levels back to normal levels pretty quickly, right? The United States doesn't have that kind of thing happening to it at the moment.
Okay, I don't see why everybody is so surprised with this. Okay, if you ever played a game called Monopoly, all right, go play Monopoly sometime and have the bank start putting out money to all the people that are playing the game. Guess what will happen? The value of the houses will all go up. Well, what happened a couple of years ago, we printed, $1 trillion and handed it out to people randomly. Then we just printed another trillion, handing out to people randomly. Oh, and then there's inflation. Oh, I need a PhD in economics to figure this one out.
Well, it's
no,
not
you
just
don't.
a trillion.
No, you don't. I need to have an IQ of 180 to figure it out. No, you don't.
It's not just $1 trillion that's being handed out to people. It's how much money the Fed has actually pumped into the market. I mean,
they pumped in tons of money.
You're talking about something like 40% or 45%.
Everything you want to learn about capitalism is in a game called Monopoly. You print money, you hand it out, then the greedy capitalists take all the houses, and there's one winner, and everybody else goes out losing. And that's what's going on right now. That's what's going on right now. So
Socialism.
I'm not saying communism is the solution, Chris, but I'm just saying you're in a big Monopoly game, and for the people that don't have a lot of houses, you are losing the game. Tell them, Sasha, you don't
So
know
the Fed-
assets,
so the Fed
you
has
are
bumped-
losing the game. 50% of Americans can only get a hold of $1,000 in the case of emergency. They're the losers of the game. They just don't even know it. They're playing a big monopoly game and they're losing it. And this inflation thing, oh, what a surprise. The government hands out trillions of dollars and the value of the assets go up. Oh boy, how did that happen? I have no idea.
So the Fed has
Oh,
increased
come on.
the money supply to such a point that 45%, somewhere between 40 and 45% of all the money that's in existence today has been created in the last couple of years.
Of course.
Now,
You just
how
turn the
they
printing presses
unwind
on.
that is going to be a really significant issue. Do they unwind? Because they've bought bonds, they've done all these different things. So it's a matter of, yes, unloading, increasing interest rates, but also unloading what they have on their balance sheet. And of course, their balance sheet is still quite high coming off the back of the Great Recession. So
That's because you're not building things with the money, Sasha. I mean,
it's a difficult position
that.
for the US.
They're handing people money. They're not saying, oh, if you build a boat, you get some money. Oh, if you build a house, you get some money. Or if you create an asset, you get some money. No, they're just handing people money and inflation happens. So all that money you got handed, it's coming back to Papa, coming back to the house, baby. Okay, and you're paying for it every day through inflation. So once again, the American public is duped again by our politicians. Not a surprise.
Well,
And
I don't
so the
think
thing is, we see Biden down there.
that,
What a big surprise!
I don't think that the American people were duped at all. Biden said this is what he was going to do.
Well, Trump did the same thing.
Coming into the election, he said that this is what he was
That's
going
the reason
to do.
I say politicians,
Said,
Trump
look,
and Biden.
He actually said, look, the skin color is the only thing that matters. So I'm going to give special benefits and grants to black farmers, but not to white farmers. Like these are all things that he actually said. I read some of this stuff on
because
air.
he's a racist.
So
I mean, he's a racist, but the Democrats don't want to call him a racist.
He said he was going to spend money like a drunk
on.
sailor, and that's exactly what he's done.
You know,
so
I'm only giving money to Scottish people.
Okay, I know this is going to make Shaquille Latimer's day, but we're not going to talk about the HBCUs today. But we do pray for those who were threatened by bomb threats, and I'm going to try my best to keep us away from issues of that as on.
Why our ratings are going up? People love you in Lithuania, Steve.
But real quickly, let's get to the black.
You can talk about
hey,
it.
Hey, I want to welcome all our people from Ukraine, Poland, Lithuania, and Algeria, because they tend to watch our program.
Hey,
we'll
Steve.
talk about that. We'll talk about that in a minute. But there have been significant bombings at these HBCUs. But I think that we just have to make sure that these people are held accountable to the law, and that no institution should be bombed at. And
you go find them, you arrest them, you put them in jail, you nail them to the cross. Well, if you find these bombers, we need to nail them to a cross.
Yeah,
so everybody can see
that's what I'm saying, right? There's been bomb threats, right? There's been bomb threats. Has there
bomb
been actually bombs? Right,
bomb threats? Okay, then you don't nail them to the wall. You
now, and I heard in your opening about is this hate crime? Is it race? And of course, I mean, well, what else could it possibly be? There couldn't possibly be any other explanation. Oh my God, it must be racism, right? But the New York Times reported that the FBI has got a report saying that the suspects are juveniles. So we could be talking about a bunch of 10-year-old kids that are sitting there being idiots, right? And going to the public phone box and ringing up and going, I'm going to bomb the school. We don't know anything about what's happened. We have no idea what the situation is, but it must be racism. Oh my God!
Shaquille, you know something, Shaquille? You're exactly right. Let's go back in history, back to the Washington D.C. snipers. I was in Washington D.C. I was in Baltimore at that point in time. Scared, we were all scared to death. Oh my God! The snipers are going to get us. And the big thing was that every broadcaster of color in Baltimore was saying it's white supremacy. It's white supremacists going out and killing people of color, even though it was the majority were not, but that's okay. But they were killing people of color. That's what they were doing. The minute that both suspects were arrested and they were both black, everybody shut up. There was nothing more said about any of that. And that's where we need to be right now.
That's because the media sells racism. Come on, Chris.
I
mean, it's the number one seller in U.S. media.
They got people out there that are performing heinous crimes. Catch them, punish them.
That's right. That's
you
what
know,
you do.
and let's move on.
And give them a lot of that. By the way, I have a commercial
with the
for
Carl
Shaquille.
Rittenhouse thing. Nobody knew until the trial was actually on, and even then, hardly anybody knew that there was no black people involved in no black people were his victims.
I got a
it was a white kid killing white people.
I got a break
Nobody
for
knew
a
that
Shaquille
because the media
commercial.
likes to twist and distort things all the time. And as somebody with obviously a great level of military experience, you know that you never assume things until you actually have the facts. But unfortunately, you've got a media who are just completely out of control.
That's
They
true.
make
We
it.
are out
They
of
don't
control. I
report it.
got a break for a commercial.
Sorry.
Break for a commercial.
I'm not really into saying what you want to hear, so please excuse me. And I don't really give a damn how much you make, my dear, so please excuse me.
Okay.
Great commercial. I have to address a couple of things really quick. Been letting folks talk and everything, but just listening and observing. And one, it will actually surprise Shaquille will not come back to the race issue, and I'm gonna toss back to Steve at the end of what I've got to say. One, if y'all want to talk about the black farmers, that was something that was actually going on over a long period of time. It was actually done all the way back to like Obama and others, and it had to do with how the USDA was treating those black farmers and things along that line. So there was a lot of money that was misappropriated by the USDA, and that's what that settlement was about. It was about trying to make sure that, because during that time, the black farmers actually decreased in a significant amount of the population that was black farmers. Some of that was because of the movement to urban areas and other factors that existed, but there were some people that were actually losing their farmlands, and a lot of that was because of USDA policies and things along that line. So we can't say that it was not something that didn't need to be addressed and was addressed, and it's still continuing to be addressed because the amount of farmers that have gone down, and I've actually come from a family of farmers, because like I said, I've got family members that are in that farm space, and fortunately we didn't lose any land, but I can't say that I'm aware of, but I know that it was an issue. Hold on a second, I'll let you talk, so let me finish my other thoughts and everything else that I was going to say. Even when it comes to the whole thing about the colleges and things along that line, there have been some definite attacks by some of the folks that are definitely in that area of white supremacy, and others that have definitely gone against some of the universities and things of that nature. I do understand what Chris is saying about what happened in Baltimore. I am aware of that as well, and I do remember that case, and I do know some people that were involved in that case as well. So I would agree that you need to figure out what is happening, whether the actual people that are doing it are actually the ones that are being accused of it. But I do know that even here in Durham, when there was a protest, and it was right here in downtown Durham, there was the belief that there would be people that would be coming in that were from like some of these far-right organizations, and they did come in. They stayed on the fringe, because if they'd come into the downtown area, to be perfectly honest, they probably would have been run out on a rail. Like I said, they stayed on the fringe, but they did not to come into the main core of where the actual
so white supremacists
and all of that. Hold on a second, I'll let you everybody talk.
White supremacists. You bring up two like major points.
Hold on a second. I'm going to let everybody finish, and you can respond back. But this is coming to Steve. The other thing that I was going to bring up, which is not about race, is the whole concept of with inflation and things of that nature. Is, are we depending too much on not getting enough done in our true infrastructure? We just had here in North Carolina a building that collapsed in Hickory. We know what happened in Pennsylvania. We know what happened in other places. So yes, I am worried about some of the things that are happening in terms of social justice and everything else, but I'm also worried about how we are treating our roads and bridges and things of that nature, because we got things like Hickory collapsing and we got things like Pennsylvania collapsing. That could be even more of a danger than the coronavirus if people are driving down the roads and everything is collapsing. And I'm being sarcastic when I say that.
Well, so Mark, let me just respond to some of the things that you said. Firstly, if you're trying to persuade me that Biden decided to give money to black farmers, not because of this race-obsessed thing that the hard left of his party is about, but because somehow he thought that was going to rectify the decades of underfunding by the USDA. Give me a break, come on.
Well, before you go grab your favorite book, it was actually done under Obama. It was done under Obama, and even before Obama, under Nixon.
The second thing I'll say is if you want to start always equating white supremacy, because there's apparently this huge, big, percentage of the United States that are running around that are white supremacists. But if that's the case, why are they all, for example, on the hard right? I mean, most of the racist organizations have been on the left. A lot of them are socialist organizations. And I just might remind you, how many slaves did the Republicans own throughout history?
What is he talking about? The racism
Zero.
on the left.
Yeah, that was a pretty
talking about? You have all these white supremacists.
That was a pretty Democrat kind of idea, right? The KKK and the Dixiecrats, they were all Democrats.
Australians
right?
are drinking some serious Kool-Aid. I mean, come on.
I'll get what he's saying, because
Racism
racism can be across both boundaries and everything. Because I mean, the Posse Comitatus, which is, if the Klan is in the South, the Posse Comitatus is in the Midwest, and that is actually
look, racism is an international sport. Let me tell you, even in Great Britain, the real reason they Brexit, they didn't want the bloody Syrians coming over and the Middle Easterns coming over. Come on, David, admit it. And the only reason, the main reason they Brexited. Let me tell you something. The only reason Scotland didn't care, none of them want to go to Scotland because it's too bloody cold. So the Scottish people, because no one wants to go there. That is the reality of life.
Sick and tired of having the EU
UK racism.
To us how we should live.
Come on, eat the racism, baby.
Should kill. There's no racism even among your own Aborigines there in
they
Australia.
The Aborigines, but see, he never goes to Uluru. I've been to Uluru. I've been to the. I have been to the Rock. I have been there. He hasn't been to the Rock.
Of course, there is racism.
Of
course, there's racism in Australia against our Indigenous people, but that doesn't mean
they used to shoot them.
Can I say something about racial crime? Are
you going to try to defend Scotland?
These days,
Let's play Scotland the Brave.
Every single crime has to be labeled as racially motivated, or terrorism motivated, or whatever. So, but I don't know. I really don't know. Why can't we just call it crime? Whatever crime is, because I think by labeling it as racial crime, you're playing into the hands of the racists. You're creating a racist society by labeling it all as racial crime, but actually it's not always the case. It's just crime underneath. That's the way it was.
Hey, so real quickly,
hold on a second. I have a quick question for Scott. I mean, for David and everything. David, I also know that you are a big time advocate for the disability community. So I was wondering what your feelings are as to how we're doing in the world in that relationship as well. Because I hear what you're saying about race relations, but I also know that you're a big defendant of the disabled.
Well, the whole world is talking about this, Black Lives Matter and racial equality and stuff like this. But the reality is, disabled people, still remain well and truly bottom of the heap. But who's talking about that? Who's tweeting about disability life matters, right? It's whatever's trendy and cool at the time, and at the moment it's racial stuff. And I know, for example, people with learning disability, which I'm not like, they have some of the worst health outcomes anywhere in society. But who's, it's been like that for decades.
Disabled people.
We thank you so much for that, David. Real quickly, Mark, can you give us the Black History Leader of the Day, please?
I will actually give you two of them, and actually one of them actually comes back to something that Shaquille is very much passionate about and everything, and that is those that are leaderships, those that are in the leadership of the top 10, or we talk about the top percentages, and that's been something that's been going on in modern society, but it's not been just going on in modern society. So the two leaders that I will give you are actually, one is out of the world of sports, and I think that definitely Mr. Greco will enjoy this one, since he is a fan of a lot of things, including the military, but I imagine he's also a fan of sports as well. So I will give you Wendell Scott. Wendell Scott, who was definitely very much
Yeah.
involved in the racing space and definitely was the first African American to actually do really well on the NASCAR circuit and all of that. And actually, it took a
Wow.
while for him to actually get the trophy that he deserved and all of that. So I would definitely give you Wendell Scott as one of those folks. A lot of times people forget that NASCAR kind of started out of the Carolinas and other parts, and part of that was people being liquor runners. And I'm sure that was part of
Moonshiners.
history as well and all of that. But definitely that would be one of the folks that I would give. The other one that I would give, and this comes back to what I was seeing if Shaquille wanted to pop back in. And when we talk about the talented 10th and we talk about the elite, which has been a conversation, whether it was Occupy Durham, whether it's around people talking about the elite now. Well, there was a gentleman talking about that many years ago. There was also one of the founders of the NAACP, that being W.E.B. Du Bois. So W.E.B. Du Bois definitely brought up the thing about trying to rise up those that were in the top 10% in terms of education, and then them being the elite and actually kind of like taking the lead within the African American community. So those would be my two that I would bring to your attention: Wendell Scott and W.E.B.
And I'll have one I'll take a point of personal privilege, and I was going to close out on this in my monologue, but I want to honor a friend of mine who was one of my law professors at West Virginia University, the late professor and Supreme Court Justice Franklin D. Cleckley, who served in the JAG Corps, and he was actually such an authoritative figure on the rules of evidence that still today in the West Virginia courts, he died about, I think, 10 years ago. They cite the Cleckley rules of evidence versus the federal laws of evidence in West Virginia. And I'll never forget, he spoke at our graduation, and he told a story that was so moving. When he was appointed as the Supreme Court Justice to become the first Black in West Virginia Supreme Court history, he was inaugurated to give our commencement speech at law school graduation. And he said that when he was sworn in for the state bar in West Virginia, he was told to stand outside the clubhouse so the other lawyers could be sworn in. And he devoted his life to justice, defending those that needed legal service for years from the law school. And when the governor gave him an award, he said that never before had there been the words justice that would go together so well, justice and Cleckley, when he named him the Supreme Court Justice. And so I think that just goes to show, can you imagine that, being a Black man, number one in your class, and having served your country, and then being told you have to sit outside when the other lawyers are sworn into the courthouse. I mean, it just was amazing, right?
You should file a lawsuit.
Yeah. Steve, just really quickly, I don't know that you ever answered the question that I had raised and everything. Are you at all concerned? Because like I said, I did see that in the small town of Hickory, a recently put up building had collapsed and everything. And then, like you said, the thing in Pennsylvania, and we can go all over the country and actually all over the globe, but particularly our country. Are you at all concerned about the way the infrastructure is? I mean, the physical infrastructure, our bridges, our roads, and things along those lines, because like I said, I was being slightly sarcastic when I said more that it could be just as dangerous as coronavirus. But I do have concerns. I mean, I'm not a driver, but I do catch the bus and other things. And when you're going out in those bumpy roads, and who knows when they're going to collapse. I was just wondering, is this, as an elected official, something you are concerned about?
Yes. And I've said this time and time again that we are just, and we've got the bipartisan infrastructure bill, the 1.5 trillion that was passed by President Biden, the U.S. Senate and Congress. But at the end of the day, we are falling behind in infrastructure, bridges, roads. I would also say 5G investment in broadband. We make a big deal about 5G, even the Innovation Act that Senator Schumer proposed. Let's not forget that we're talking about 1.5 billion. You know how much China is spending in 5G? 50 billion. 50 billion in 5G networks, and they're running 300 gigabits versus our, I think, 75 gigabits a second. So the bottom line is that infrastructure is critical, and Mark, in terms of airport modernization. If you go to India today, the airports are nicer than those in the United States. The airlines, planes are newer. I mean, it's just unbelievable. When I used to go to India as a kid with my parents, the airports were awful. And we're just to end, my point is that I've had this concern is whether the money that we're putting in the system will be put into shovel-ready projects and executed quickly. Because in America, we used to do that really well. When Roosevelt was president, we executed 1,000 airports. We put electricity in every rural city in America. We completed the Manhattan Bridge, the George Washington Bridge in 4 years under budget and ahead of schedule. And today, to do 1 mile of subway in New York City in Manhattan costs billions of dollars and takes 12 years. So I want to see, is this money going to go into projects? And, Harold Ickes ran the Works Progress Administration, so he was actually specifically involved in the deal of getting these projects pushed through. So this is something I think that we need to do.
The reason why it takes so long, and the reason why it takes
so
much
why does it take so long?
Why? Because of the ridiculous amount of regulations that you guys have. That's why it's so hard to get anything done in the United States. America is a great country to invest in projects, but if I'm looking for a country to start something in, the United States is not very high up on that list of countries where I'm going to go, because regulations and bureaucracy cause these sorts of delays. Why is there not high-speed rail in California? Why is this stuff that you're talking about in New York not done? And honestly, when I drove up to Long Island, the roads in New York, I've been to third world countries. I have never been on allegedly bituminized roads that are as bad as the roads that I saw in New York. Okay, and that is one of the world's financial capitals, if not the most preeminent financial capital in the world. The United Nations building is there. That's why I was in New York. And to see, the leaders of international, leaders of countries come into an international body, and the only other place where the United Nations really is in Geneva. And I can tell you what, the roads around Geneva are a lot different to the roads around New York. It's embarrassing. I mean, I'm not even American. I'm embarrassed for the condition of things. But instead, what are some of the things that they're talking about, even in this hard infrastructure thing? Tree equity. Tree equity. Like, what are we talking about? Electric charging stations. And then you get people like me who say, hey, with these electric charging stations, how are you going to produce all the lithium that you need for the batteries? Because that's got a lot of environmental, there's a lot of environmental damage caused by that. How are you going to be creating the electricity in the first place? Because if you don't create it more efficiently than oil, maybe that's not a very good solution. And you know what the response is? I don't care about black people, so therefore I'm racist. Because I've brought up environmental concerns, I must be racist. This is what the problem is. It's because politicians are in charge. And what I think you should do is let people that actually achieve things achieve, and let people who are idiots and argue, let them argue.
I think Shaquille, you got a good point here, and I'm just going to take 1 minute, Steve, if you don't mind. So basically, what happens is you have windmills, right? Wind farms, all these wind farms. The blades on those wind farms cannot be produced except with fossil fuel. They can't be produced except with fossil fuel. They're supposed to be 25-year life on them. They're treating them as 10 to 15-year life. They're taking them down. Guess where they're putting them? In the landfills. They're putting them in the landfills.
They can't be recycled. They can't be reused.
That's correct.
Same thing with the cadmium solar panels.
That's right. So it's really hard to sit back and say, okay, what do we do? We know we want to do well. Our intent here, but basically as a prior military person and everything else, my intent as a military person was always to protect and defend the United States of America. That was my mission. I wanted to do that. But sometimes intent, kind of confuses with actuality, practicality.
Yeah.
Don't listen to these apologists, please. Okay. Look, the windmills work.
Guys, and if they don't work, the solution must be.
And let me tell you also,
solar
works,
more money into
guys. That's what developing
can't produce steel.
Move that direction.
You cannot produce
all this garbage is apologist garbage. It's right.
David Riley wants to say something.
Right crazy. Oh well, it's if we put windmills.
Just a quick.
Give me a break. The windmills work and the solar works.
Is there anything going on in the world that we should talk about?
David Riley was trying to say something.
Sorry, David Riley. I'm sorry, David.
Thank you. I'll keep it quick, but that great story. That you remember when the COP was in Glasgow in October. We had all these world delegates in Glasgow, and we were shipping them around by electric cars. and there was I wasn't staying at the Glen Eagles Hotel. You probably heard of famous hotel, and so they had all these electric cars come back and forward from Glasgow to the Glen Eagles, and they had to charge all the cars up at the Glen Eagles at night time. So what did they do? They got a diesel generator. And they to charge the electric car, and that's a true story.
And let's remember that electric vehicles and their batteries don't last as long in cold weather. And you want to talk about environmentalism. Have a look at what the European Union does. Every 6 weeks, the European Union moves. They have like something like 200 big trucks come in and move everything from the EU Parliament down to France, down to Paris. Then they move it all back again, and these are the people that care about.
He's supporting the Australian coal industry, so forget that. And they're supporting the North Sea oil industry. Forget these guys. Don't listen to them. The fact is, solar works. The fact is, wind farm works. And the fact is, you're listening to people that have this right-wing agenda to push big oil and
how did those
all
wind
over the
farms,
world. That's
remind me how those wind farms worked in Texas a handful of months ago, Nick. How did that go for them?
We're going to get ready for closeout, guys. I've got to. I want to thank everyone for being with us. I'll take a minute to say that we'll be President's Day on Monday. At the end of next week, I will have some exciting news to share with North Carolina about my political future. Stay tuned. It's quite exciting. And this will be my team, hopefully, as we continue the path forward. That's all I'll say. Secondly, I just want to say that we didn't talk about stuff going on in the world. We'll do that. But the bottom line is that we want to thank and congratulate all the Olympians who did so well. We congratulate all the American champions, the Canadian hockey team, women's hockey team, Nathan Chen, all of the Americans, the valiant efforts of curling. We didn't make it. Eileen Gu, the Russian woman who won the skating. I probably will lose count. We'll probably go over Monday some of the medalists. But at the end of the day, I got to tell you that it grew on me over a few weeks. I don't follow winter sports, but I remember as a kid listening, I think his name was Jim Lampley, where he talked about the victory, the thrill of victory and the agony of defeat. It hurts to see someone fall on the skis, but it feels good to see them get up. And it brings emotion to me that these greatest athletes in the world train their entire lives to stand on the Olympic stand. But we don't talk enough about the courage that they've had to go through everything during this pandemic, away from their families, away from spectators, still getting us their brilliant best every minute on the slopes, on the ice, wherever they are. I want to thank everyone for participating in the Olympics. To Team USA, you made us proud. Team Canada, Team Australia, teams all over the world, you're all champions. As Freddie Mercury said in his song, we are champions of the world. Because at today and the Olympics, we celebrate championships, and championships are won when we bring out the best in each other. Wouldn't it be nice? Wouldn't it be nice for one day if we could do that in American politics? How's that for some inspiration? From our family to yours, wishing you all the best as we kick off our President's Day weekend, announcing the worst president of the United States next week as well. God bless each of you. Signing off for today.